Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As attendees are connecting at the moment, I will wait just a few seconds before starting the webinar. Judy, would you like to turn your video off until you come on? Speak. Thank you.
Sorry, my laptop is broken with it fixed on. I'm still trying to switch it off. Hold on.
That's all right. Okay. All right. Well, as people are registering and joining us, good afternoon, everybody, from a beautiful, crisp, cold, sunny London. Welcome to this webinar organized by the BBIA. I am David Newman, Managing Director, and I welcome you and our many speakers and panelists to this session. What are we going to be talking about this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen? We're going to be talking about biowaste because food waste is destined to become, over the next years, the largest single waste stream which we have to handle within our waste and resources systems across not just the UK, but across the EU. Why is this? Because in the UK, as in the EU, we will have an obligation for all household and small business waste to be separately collected from the 2023. And whilst, of course, that will all not happen overnight, we can foresee a situation within the next few years where we will have extra millions and millions of tons of food waste going into treatment. What this means is a huge opportunity for the biowaste treatment industry and an opportunity for those who are making compostable materials which mimic biowaste to help with the collection systems. So we are here because we have a couple of reports to present, one which was done by the consultancy Sandcroft International. Pendragon Stuart will be talking about the methodologies for food waste collection and their recommendations on the best way to do it. Tony Breton from Novamont, but also a BBIA board member, will talk about a policy paper which we published just before Christmas on the overall roles of compostables within waste management, and particularly bio-waste management. And who better to talk about this scenario on bio-waste than Enzo Favoino from Zero Waste Europe. Enzo and I have worked together for 25 years almost now. And he will be talking about the things that we can learn from well-performing schemes for collecting biowaste. And 2/3 of biowaste in the EU is currently collected in Italy, and Enzo was one of the architects of that. Kathy Nichols, Judy Proctor, and Richard Fairweather from the Environment Agency will be talking to us about the potential changes to biowaste treatment standards and permits. And at the end of it all, Chris Preston, the Deputy Director at DEFRA for Environmental Quality, will sort of wrap up and give us some idea of the thinking of government, the policymakers on these issues. So those speakers are not going to get away lightly because they have a very qualified panel of associations who will be sort of cross-examining them, if you like, or replying to their presentations. And Jenny Grant from RIA, Adam Reed from Suez is not an association, but is the biggest waste management company in the world. Sean Sutherland, who we all know for her campaigning against plastic waste, Plastic Planet. Sam Hinton from ADBA, and Jim Armstrong from Recoup. And last but certainly not least, the end of the pipe. Where is all this stuff going to go? If it goes to soil, it's going to go to agriculture. And so we're very pleased to have Philippa Arnold from the National Farmers Union with us too. That's enough from me, ladies and gentlemen. Over to Pendragon for you to present the report on the methodologies for food waste collection. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, and hello, everyone. So as David says, we worked on a report last year on how to get the most efficient and effective food waste collection that protects and enhances the nation for us all. And this is a project we did with BBIA sponsorship, but the conclusions are our own. And just as a bit of background, so Sandcroft International is a sustainability consultancy. We work with a wide range of organizations from strategy to implementation. So we have a background in the area, but more importantly, let's get to the findings. What do we discover, and what does it mean for us all today? So we'll start with what were our objectives. What do we come to this looking to achieve? So we were looking to understand what's the best long-term solution for food waste collection that maximizes benefits and minimizes costs and damage. And an important thing here is saying the long-term solution, because exactly as David mentioned, we're going to see a huge increase in the volumes of food waste collection. And it's really important that we work out what's the most effective and efficient solution overall, rather than get caught in the sort of short-termism of, well, the most effective for the next 6 months is this, so let's just keep going with this. Because the risk there is that we end up with a suboptimal solution that we continue for years and years and years, potentially to our detriment. So that's why we're thinking, where's the overall direction we're trying to get to that's going to have the best impact for everyone? And the other thing that we thought was really important is that we want to create a model, and by that I do mean a financial model, as well as a sort of construct for deciding how do we make these important decisions, but that brings together what have been often fragmented conversations. A lot of experts have been talking about individual pockets, but sometimes it's been hard to see the big picture, because there's one comparison over here, there's another study over there, there's another cost impact over here, and there are questions around microplastic pollution over there. So what we wanted to do is bring this all together so we can have a single conversation. And as part of that, we produced a report and an underlying model, which is all publicly available. And again, the modeling is all totally transparent, so people can see how we got to these conclusions. And equally, where they have better and superior and more up-to-date data, the model can be updated to make sure that it's going to be most effective for decision making. So that's what we were trying to do: identify the best long-term solution, make it all part of one shared discussion. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to share my screen. So hopefully this will come up for you shortly.
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. So these were our principles for how do we evaluate what would success look like in terms of a really, really effective food waste collection system. So first up, it's got to be cost effective in how it's collected and how it's treated. And what we think is important here is that there's a lot of debate around microplastics and plastics contamination, which is absolutely critical. And we very much need to avoid that kind of risk. However, we want to make sure that it's also part of a broader conversation on how much is this going to cost to taxpayers and to industry. Because only by bringing those conversations together can we have a solid decision that is made with all the evidence. So we need something that's cost effective. That's really important. We also want to make sure that it encourages collections of a large amount of food waste. Our aim is, as per all of the guidelines, is to collect and process efficiently and effectively a large amount of food waste. If any of these solutions gets in the way of that, we're undermining ourselves at the first hurdle. Thirdly, we want to make sure this encourages collection of food waste that has little contamination. So what we don't want is a lot of food waste that's really, really contaminated, that's going to be very expensive and complex to separate. Again, that's going to knock us back at the first step. Then what's really important is it's got to minimize the agricultural and health risks for the nation. And this is where the question of microplastics and macroplastic pollution comes in. So we're seeing more and more research that suggests there are impacts on microplastics entering soil. So tiny fragments of plastics that can occur when you process plastic packaging or liners, etc. Now, some of the sorts of research we're starting to see, things like microplastics impeding germination of plants. So this could have significant impacts in terms of crop yields, for instance. We're also seeing that it impacts the behaviors and reproductive practices of earthworms, which affects soil quality. We're also seeing from aquatic situations that when microplastics get into fish, they affect hormonal and endocrine changes. And we're also seeing that microplastics are now concentrating in our foods and in our own bodies. Now, we don't have the full answers of exactly what impacts this has. We have a lot of indicative studies, but this is one of the critical things that we've got to be considering. How do we sensibly guard against this potential risk? Then moving on to the fifth area, we've got minimizes greenhouse gas emissions. So again, we all know we're signed up to a 2050 target. So we've got to make sure that what we're doing here doesn't put that at risk, because we want a holistic approach. And then finally, to that holistic approach, we want to increase circularity. So we want to make sure we're returning nutrients, organic carbon to the soils wherever possible, and that we're not taking low quality approaches to disposal of resources and waste. For instance, landfill is the least good, where the value of those resources is largely lost. So that's what we thought. This is what a good system will look like. What we thought is, let's establish those principles, and then let's evaluate those against the different sorts of options we have available. Now, the options we have available that we've looked through here are polyethylene bags as liners of home compost material, compostable plastic bags, or compostable bio bags as liners, paper bags as liners, no liners at all, so that's naked collection. You just put things in a food waste caddy and it's collected directly from there. And then we've included a separate line on compostable bio bags sent to IBC. Now, overall, our focus is on AD specifically, because that's the general preferred option. It's the one at scale that's looking to scale further. So we want to sort of work with the bounds of the nation in mind. But because there are IBC plants, it can be part of the solution. So we didn't want to entirely forget it. So we've taken each of those and we evaluated them against those set criteria, which say hopefully a set of shared criteria that we can all buy into. So that first column, this is the cost that we calculated per ton of food waste. Now, I say there's a detailed model that explains exactly how we got to that. But broadly speaking, it's things like the cost of the liner, then the cost of how you dispose of what comes out of the contamination that comes out of the plant. So that contamination could be the plastic, the polyethylene bags, and the adhered food waste, and then being sent to incineration, to energy from waste. Or it could be the compostable bio bags or paper bags, and then being sent to IVC along with any adhered food waste for them. And based on those variables, you'll have different costs. Now, we'll also see that some of them have added costs because they reduce the amount of food waste collected or they reduce the biogas potential. But that's broadly how we wanted to get to a cost, so we can have that informed discussion. Now, I should say these costs are not perfect. We couldn't model everything, but again, that's where if there's more embedded data available and it becomes more available, great, it can be plugged into the model and reassessed. So I'll quickly go through what were our findings on each of these areas based on the research we did, which I should have said was interviewing a wide range of industry experts, looking at a lot of current academic studies, and also looking at the performance of biowaste, both in this country, including RAP reports, etc., but also across Europe. So what do we find? So for polyethylene bags, they have the lowest cost per ton of food waste in terms of what we could calculate, because they're cheap and readily available. In terms of the amount of food waste collected, it's really convenient and simple for people. They know what to do, they can collect a large amount. In terms of the quality of food waste collected, there actually we see it fall down a bit, because we've seen in various studies that if you tell consumers they can use plastic to collect their food waste, then often they start to include more plastic into that food waste. Now, sadly, we didn't have a specific number for that, but that was something we found in, I believe, German and Italian studies. Then in terms of that, minimizing the risk of macroplastics and microplastics ending up in soils and then in human bodies. This is choosing to put plastic into the system, so that even if it is separated out, there will likely in the separation process to be fragments of plastic, both tiny ones and larger ones, created that aren't fully filtered out and that end up in soils. And then to that point of minimizing greenhouse gases, well, because there's a specified version of sending a large chunk of what's separated to incineration, you're therefore increasing the greenhouse gases related to incineration. And then finally, from a circularity point of view, because I say a lot is being separated out and sent to incineration, that's not circular. Those resources aren't being reintegrated. So that's the picture from polyethylene bags. So good for some things, not so good for everything. And that's kind of where we are at the moment. Then looking at compostable bio bags, there is a slight increase in price, which is partly because the liners are slightly more expensive at the moment. However, it's offset a bit because the gate fees sent to IBC are lower than the gate fees sent to incineration. So some of the material that comes out of this you send into compost. It's cheaper to send it to compost than it is to send it to incineration because of the tariffs involved. In terms of the quantity, similar to polyethylene bags, it's simple, people know what to do, that's great. In terms of the quality, because you can more clearly message, do not put plastic in your food waste caddy, again, it results in a better quality of food waste, low contamination. In terms of minimizing risks, if the compostable material is properly treated, therefore there wouldn't be leftover remnants of plastics knowingly going into soils. So that's minimizing the risk there. In terms of minimizing greenhouse gases, because again, we're not separating some out we're separating as little out to burn as possible. There will always be some contamination. Sadly, we find even in Italy, where there's a very well established and very effective system, there's still sadly a level of contamination. And then in terms of that circularity, again, because part of that is being sent to composting, that composted material can go back into the soil. That's organic carbon and nutrients returned to the soil. So it's a higher level of circularity. Then we move on to paper bags. So paper bags are bulkier and heavier. So the cost per unit of those liners is much larger, which is largely what accounts for the difference in cost. Then in terms of the quantity collected, we've had some anecdotal evidence, which we haven't been able to model in, that because the paper bags can degrade faster, there is what's often referred to as an ick factor in terms of how people collect things, and so they're less willing to collect as much. In terms of the quality, again, clear message, no plastics, that's great. Minimizing risk, again, similarly, minimizing greenhouse gases, similarly, increasing circularity, yeah, should be great. The only possible adjustment is if there is less food waste collected, which then takes us on to the naked collection. So this could seem like it should be the cheapest option because there's no liner to pay for at all. But actually we found that it ended up being pretty expensive. Now, there are a couple of reasons for that, actually 3 reasons. So one is that a DEFRA study showed that after 3 years, there's 50% less volume in food waste collected from councils that used no liners compared to councils that did use liners, which is again related to that ick factor. People don't like doing it because it's messy and dirty and icky to clean, so they do it less. That's a challenge, but equally that's kind of where we are at the moment. So that's one part. There's another part where not having a bag actually reduces the biogas potential. So you get less value out of it if you let it degrade in a caddy without a bag. And then finally, there was some indicative results from Preston, I believe it was, where they found that compared to an authority that didn't have bags, they were able to be much more effective and efficient with their collection. So they were able to save money on collection. So there are issues around there from a cost perspective. From a quality point of view, clear messaging, risk minimization, great. Greenhouse gas minimization, not so much if up to half of the food waste is being sent to landfill or to incineration, we're actually potentially increasing greenhouse gases. And that's what's reflected in that last very low circularity figure. And then finally on compostable biobags from a IVC or universal composting perspective. So from a cost perspective, it's always going to be much more expensive with the current incentive structure, where the gate fees to send material to composting to IVC is £45 per tonne on average, according to RAP gate fees reports, compared to £27 per tonne on average for AD plants. Now, obviously, incentives can change, so the economics of that could differ, but that's always going to be the fundamental with the current incentive structure. Now then, much of the rest of that analysis is going to be the same. The only last thing is in terms of circularity. Universal composting has advantages around nutrient return to the soil, organic return to the soil, and fewer issues around ammonia and nitrates that can happen in AD, can be dealt with, but requires an extra stage of active management. So that's the summary of what we found. Obviously, there's more behind that, and but what we can see overall from this is, on balance, we believe that compostable bio bags seems to have the best balance of costs and reduction of risks and challenges. So where we are now, from that perspective, is kind of the what next is the discussion. So exactly this kind of forum to see, what else is coming out, what might have been, what could be strengthened, improved. For instance, are there pieces of data we couldn't find but that actually can be modeled in? Then agreeing that direction of travel. Where do we want to go in the long term to have the right impact? And then finally, there is going to need to be work through how do we scale up and create the right sort of transition, because there will be some plants that may need to adjust their processing procedures, but equally with other plants being need to be built to reach our projected capacity, there's a chance if we set the right direction, set everything going in the right way, rather than say this incremental catch-up approach, which can leave us in the worst of all cases. So those are our findings. I hope you found them useful, and I look forward to discussing them more later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pen. There's a few questions coming from the Q&A now of the panelists. Pen, if you would take your slides down, please.
Yeah.
Any of the panelists would like to jump in here on the findings which Pen has just given us.
Hi, David. I'll go if that's okay. Thanks.
Of course.
Thanks, Pen. That was really interesting. And certainly I think the organics industry would welcome anything that can help reduce contamination and, better protect the soils. I guess one of the things that we hear often from members is how can we be certain that, if we're extracting bags from the NAD process and potentially sending them to IBC, how can we be certain that they're all going to compost properly through the process and we're not going to end up, increasing contamination with plastics that have got in there? And I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that. Our composters often say, they find it difficult to differentiate on site between compostables versus traditional plastics.
So our perspective is there's a lot of work that can be done around standards and ensuring that they're consistently met, they're clearly communicated. There are also other potential opportunities around, for instance, standard patterns on materials, on colours, to create that sort of consistency. But also, I'm sure this is an area that that BBIA also have a perspective on.
Enzo, did you want to jump in? Jim?
Yes, just a question. Maybe it's a little bit serious discussion, but from the point of view of the packaging tax related to the liners, and I don't know whether they come under that or not, but if they did, is it possible to mitigate the tax with any, obviously, recycled content rules, or a compostable bag actually would qualify for a mitigation by doing something else for the very fact that it's on?
No, sorry, Pen, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, at the moment, you won't be able to mitigate the cost of the plastic tax against them. There's a strong argument that they are from a renewable source, so should be considered that way. However, they're not currently at the moment.
Fine. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Sorry, Enzo, did you want to say something? No? Okay. All right. Any other comments for Pendragon? Pen, then I will leave the questions which have come here for you, and there are many, for the end discussion, okay? And we will try to get to them later, okay? Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tony Breton, who is a member of the BBIA board and Novamont, was going to present a policy paper which was written for policy makers by BBIA towards the end of last year. The floor is yours, Tony.
Thank you, David. Yes, as Dave said, I'm Tony from Novamont, also Treasurer, Director of BBIA, been involved with organics for many years. Let me talk about the 10-year perspective that we have. But first of all, I thought it'd be interesting for people to understand what's actually driving BBIA members. We're essentially industry who want to drive a sustainable bioeconomy. We believe the biological loop must start or finish with soil quality, soil health. It's essential. We need, as an industry, we need it right now for first, second generation feedstocks, but many of our members also need it at the end of the day to be able to recycle our products. We want to develop what we call symbiotic, not parasitic relationships with everybody, really. We're not here to say, take our products, deal with it. It's our products can help in a particular challenge, whatever it may be it plastic soil, plastic mulch films, food waste, as we'll come to on here, biolubricants in offshore energy generation, those kind of things. As far as packaging is concerned, today it's about 15, maybe 20,000 tons of all compostable plastics and packaging. We've done some work, and some of our members have done some work to suggest maybe for the UK 110,000 tons. And a report came out last week or the week before from the BPF that suggested it was 150,000 tons by 2030. So in the scheme of things, not a lot, but in the potential benefits it can bring, quite a lot. So where are we in terms of biowaste in the UK today? For garden waste, we do quite well. We've got about 90% capture rate, about 5 million tons. Food waste, atrocious, really. We collect about 800,000 tons of municipal food waste across the UK, which is only around 10% capacity of potential capture. And in total capacity, including all the commercial and other kind of stuff, we think there's about 9 million tons of organic waste treatment. Economics, or Pen just covered some of this. Gate fees are for vessel composting around 50 quid a ton. AD gate fees, according to the mode of the last RAP report, £5 a ton. The reason that that particular sector is doing it as well as it is subsidies, heat sales, power sales. It's all energy. It's not what you would traditionally call recycling, and those can generate between 60 and 70 pounds a ton. So you can see where the interest lies from there. When it comes to the end of waste for biowaste, we've got national specifications in the UK, but we do have the end of waste status currently under review. Our friends at the agency are going to cover this off shortly. But in order to have end of waste, you need a specification and you need a market. So for compost, we know there is a low, but it's an established market. It's got low value at this point in time, but it has a value for quality compost. For whole digestate, on the other hand, it's at best very, very low. Typically, it's negative. So whether you could say that something that you're paying somebody to take has a market or not is a question of debate. And if there is no market and there is no end of waste, then you can argue that that's not actually recycling. There's concerns in compost and digestate on plastics, and the economic situation in terms of where we are, it's driving competition, it's reducing prices, and as a result, it's reducing processing times and pushing people to force stuff out a bit quicker than possibly they should. The industry itself is worth about, we think, £350 million a year. But when we look at who is doing it the best, Enzo will cover this in much more detail. Italy, it's the best. They do about a couple of million tons of food, garden waste. They capture about 47% of the food waste, which is out there today, about 4.5 million tons. It's split between north and south. The north is quite good. The south needs to catch up. But similarly, they have a capacity of around 9 million tons, but they have established markets for compost. You cannot send uncomposted digestate to soil in Italy, and the market value for compost maybe about 10 plus euros a ton. Gate fees there. This will make people interested here. I heard 180 euros a ton at the moment. And as a result of this consolidation and the 10 years experience that they've had, compared to our 350 million doing the same amount of biowaste, their industry is worth 1.8 billion. And as David mentioned at the start, as a whole of Europe, we collect just 16% food waste, 2/3 of which is in Italy alone. But generally, all of our concerns, whichever way you sit today, should be the same. So we have a climate emergency. We currently have a health and social crisis. There's air pollution problems. There's water problems. There's in supply and pollution. We have huge issues on non-renewable resource depletion, loss of biodiversity, plastic pollution, and a general need, in my view anyway, for an economic reset. But soil, funnily enough, brings all of these together, and within that, biowaste management itself has the ability to impact on all of these things. Soil, why is soil important? Well, it's fundamental to life on Earth. Not only does it give us all the food we need, the water we need, it helps with air quality, it helps with flood protection. The water sits in the soil, goes through there slower. It's essential for carbon fluxes, carbon flows, and carbon sequestration. It's the home of biodiversity. And it is essentially a non-renewable resource. We need to do more to protect our soils and reinvigorate them back to life. But it's kind of the neglected one. It costs billions in soil erosion across Europe a year. Michael Gove, when he was Minister for DEFRA, said that we only had 30 years left of soil fertility. And even Bill Gates thinks we should talk about soil as much as we do about coal. Just in terms of carbon loss alone, you can see from these these pictures, they don't look too bad. If you look at the UK on the left, we don't seem to have very much soil loss. You can see on the right that the darker the color of the dots, the higher the level of carbon loss. But even where we're green, we're still losing in the UK 3 million tons of fertile topsoil a year. And this is the stuff at the top is the stuff that we need to survive, essentially. So we would think biowaste, perfect solution. We've got 12 million tons of it. We've had 20 years of huge growth in capacity and treatment, but we haven't had the same growth in collection systems. So with DEFRA saying we're going to have mandatory biowaste collection for food and garden waste, the rest, England is going to catch up with the UK. But biowaste itself, if we treat it properly and treat it holistically and systemically, we can work on greenhouse gas gas emissions. We can produce energy we need, but we can also return those nutrients back to soil and restore the soil to soil loop that we have through urbanization has broken it. So essentially, yeah, job done. But today, the limited amount of collection means there is huge competition for feedstocks, which has in turn driving down gate fees. No gate fees, no investment to upgrade, less attention on outputs, and more tolerance of contamination. So here in the UK, 5% contamination is contractually common. What does 5% mean? If you look at 5% weight of plastic per ton, that's 6,500 or so carrier bags. And by the time, if you don't deal with those, by the time you've gone through the organic or composting process, you're up to essentially 10%. And for every ton of compost plastic you have, you lose another 2 tons of organics. In Italy, they have a contamination rate of food waste about 1.5%, 100 million euros. Here at 5%, that could be 200 million. In the EU, we're looking at over $1 billion a year just at 1.5% contamination, without accounting for all the damage it does to machinery, blockages, and so on and so on. But we also have the issue of microplastics in outputs. Microplastics, 10,000 tons of organic waste, million tons of organic waste. The agency think could include, oh, shush. Plastics are a problem. Why won't you turn off? This is the good stuff. This is a picture from RAP from about 10 years ago. This is what past 110 compost digestate looks like. This is permitted to go to land, and per hectare, the QP allows 180 million fragments of plastic per hectare. But we also need to get the outputs right. It's not just about the plastics. We need to deal with compaction and soil erosion. The picture on the right, unfortunately, is a picture of compost which was spread to land in Wales. It doesn't look good. Digestate has impacts, but it is also good. We're not sitting here saying digestate is bad. It's full of fertilizer, but it's how do we get that fertilizer and everything back in the right form? As we are currently doing it, digestate has a negative impact on organic matter. It increases bulk density and thus compacts soils. Increasingly, research is showing that whole food waste digestate is killing worms. We have issues with conductivity of salt, and by reducing the worm count, you desiccate the soil, and as a result, they've shown in Holland, by injecting the digestate, which is what we are currently advocating here, in order to reduce ammonia, you are in effect reducing wider biodiversity because you're reducing the food chain. So we need to look at the opportunity in a bigger site. We need to start the design of the system with the soil and end it with the collection system and make those two link up properly. But what's this got to do with compostables? Well, food waste must be clean, convenient and efficient to work and work effectively. There's a huge amount of evidence to show that bags are fundamental. It is essential that all of the process together deliver the outcomes that society needs. This is going back to the climate emergency, water, soil, and so on and so on. Italy, they have various interventions on bags, not least requiring that if you have a bag, it has to be compostable. And their compostables market today is about 100,000 tons. Again, nothing. So about 1.5% of what is being put in compostables delivers 6 million tons of biowaste, which is clean at high value. And more recently, they've moved on and have developed an EPR system for compostables. So the compostable industry now is helping to contribute to the system which they are designed to be in. But we cannot lose perspective on scale. 1.5%, 2% will deliver the food waste that we need. So in conclusion, we have an opportunity from biowaste, which is enormous, to cover environmental, ecological, economic improvement across the system. But it will only get there if we can do it from a systemic approach, starting with the soil. Compostables themselves are not what you would necessarily call a plastic issue. We see them, especially in biowaste collection, as a biolubricant, for want of better words. But what we must do is engage wider, go beyond what we do today, which is just look at single issues in silo tanks and approach it more from a systemic level. Thank you. And there's further slides and all of the references and everything you can get from Charles at the end. Sorry for running over, David.
No, thanks, Tony. There's a lot to handle, and you were comprehensive. Now, if you could stop sharing your screen, and I will ask the panelists, please, to come back and shoot you questions. Who's first? Adam.
Thank you, David. Hello, Tony. Hello, Tony. Really good presentation, mate. And an awful lot of sense in there. I've got to say, I'm very supportive as a resource or waste manager. My question comes, I suppose, the first speaker as well. It fits well with both of you. How do we get the capture right? You know, the public are fickle. So how do we ensure that they do it right and we don't end up with contamination or mixed materials or multiple bags? And, you know, if we want one bag, we want one bag. Do we make them all purple or pink or green? What do we do to make sure that my gran doesn't get it wrong and become the problem?
We know we can do it right. When you look at the original food waste trials that RAP did back in 2007, 2008, the participating households then were collecting 3 kilos per week. Because we'd got once it got rolled out and there was no targets, food waste became a kind of an excuse to enable fortnightly residual collection. And if you look at places like Wales, where they still have a lot to do, but the emphasis there was food waste is recycling. We need food waste for the recycling, therefore we must do it right. You need to approach it that it is a recycling thing. It's not something to tag on. Labeling can be sorted out quite easily. If you look at what the co-op have done, they've got their bright green carrier bags, their staff are trained, local authorities can provide the right bags, they can provide the right comms. We just need everybody to be pushing in the same direction.
Sean.
Thanks, David, and thanks, Tony. That was insightful as ever. I had a quick question. I love that expression, the biolubricant. So it's when it is the right use of a compostable material, because it's part of the conduit to bring food waste into the system that it's designed to have its end of life. But I'm also very aware from all the work that we do in packaging is that a lot of people are thinking that the compostables are the answer to everything. And that's, I feel, why there's been a bit of pushback against compostables being recognised at many levels, because sometimes they're being used for the wrong thing. A PLA water bottle, is that the answer? So my question is there an opportunity through all of this for us to create some kind of system, some kind of agreed policy between the compostable manufacturers and the packaging manufacturers and the people that then buy from them to really determine the right use of a compostable? Yes,
well, yeah, for sure. There are applications which are still, to me, no-brainers today. The obvious ones, tea bags, why we are still allowing polypropylene tea bags, and every single national government would appear to be promoting polypropylene tea bags, fruit labels, these kind of things. Everything else, the simple ones you should be able to mandate, like they have in Italy with fruit and vegetable bags. These are simple carriers for food waste. When it comes to more complicated packaging, you do need a consensus across the system. So you can't, I would say, well, it works for potato bags because of the transparency, you get less food waste from potato, but it's not necessarily so good for onions. You need somehow, like you say, to come up with a matrix to say everybody goes in this direction, because if everything in a particular application is in a single material, so you could go food service, all food service which is not reusable, make it reusable, where you can't, all of it must be compostable. Simple. The simpler you can make it, the better it is. There will always be crazy applications, Sean. But by the same extent, this is why Adam will always have a job, because there will always be people putting stuff out there in the wrong format, even with crazy EPR fees down the road. Great, thank you. I have a final little top-up question. Because I totally agree, you've got to have consistency, and then Adam's gran knows it's a tea bag, it always goes in the food waste bin. Why are we leaving this to the choice of the consumer at the end of the chain, when the change in the direction has to happen with consistency in the middle, which is business and all the material suppliers? Is there a limit to how much compostable material can go through the food waste stream before it just starts to overwhelm? Well, if you look at where they're at in Italy, they're at 2%, and they've got the biggest market in the world at 150,000 tons. Whether that's capacity, I don't know. But what we also need to think is not just plastics. So if you start thinking coated fibers, the kind of bamboo-y coated things, these things will compost just as well as a twig. So it's a case of making sure that the infrastructure itself is in a way future-proofed. The facility, some of the facilities that Enzo might talk about are 300,000 tons. Our biggest facility here is 100,000 tons. We need more. We need big, but we also need it in the right place, linked with the smaller decentralized plants for other areas. Yeah, yeah. I'm going to stop you there, Tony. I think Sam, perhaps you had a question, Sam. I saw you sort of in the dark there.
Yeah, thank you. It ties into sort of what Tony was already touching on there. There's Italy has a very good system where they are composting post AD, but how do we achieve that in the UK? Because we've obviously already built 680 something AD plants.
We have 680 AD plants, but they're only taking 800,000 tons of municipal food waste. So the amount of actual food waste coming through today isn't, that we would target in our kind of applications, isn't that huge. Building to the future. If you look at somewhere like ours at Mulby, that is that they have access to in-vessel composters. We know that the scraps coming from some of the plants in Wales is going off to in-vessel composters. If we can get the purity right and the system up front, then there's enough in-vessel composting capacity. It's about making the system work and make it work economically.
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, we want it to be economical, but we don't want to end up transporting waste multiple miles to various different composting facilities.
Sure, but waste is always going to travel. It always has done, it always will do.
Yes, and conversely, Sam, we're transporting lots of waste at the moment to incinerators, aren't we?
Yeah.
Okay, well, it makes Adam happy. Jenny, did you have any point to make there?
Yeah, just briefly. Thanks, Tony. Very interesting. Question we've been asked before is, that you made the point about plastic carryover and ultimately microplastics potentially ending up in soils. If we're proposing to move away from traditional plastics and move to compostables, are we confident that if any of those do get through the system and still end up in the soil, that they're going to fully biodegrade and not cause any similar problems than the traditional plastics are?
In terms of thin films, those kind of materials which are used on the filmic side, they're generally all soil biodegradable anyway, which is quite rapid, so a 2-year biodegradation period. And I haven't looked deeply into the research, but I would think even fragments of PLA, when you compare it to conventional, so the PLA, a chunk of PLA won't go in 2 years necessarily, but it won't be there for 500. But
sure.
Yes, but what we don't advocate that because it's compostable, there should be no limit. The limit should always be the same, and we should be driving those limits down. But what we need to do is make sure that the processes are suitable to actually be able to treat what's coming through.
And did you want to make a comment there? Or you cover that in your presentation?
Is that for me? No, if I can pick it here, because actually there were so many remarks that are indeed intriguing, but too many nudges coming from different angles, and I can't pick on them all. But anyway, we have to remember that one of the fundamental requirements of EN 13432, which is the European standard for compostability, is intrinsic biodegradability. You have to pass a lab testing which shows it degrades 90% during the testing period, just like cellulose, which is biodegradable by definition. During composting, actually, part of that will be degraded, part of that will be turned into compost, because we want to retain valuable organic matter to give it back, but it is not bioplastics anymore. It is humified organic matter, which will degrade in time, releasing nutrients and so on and so forth. But there is a fundamental requirement in this respect. Apart from that, I think the most important remark was done by some of the panelists regarding, I don't think the plant-based bottle to be a good example for using bioplastics. Also because we will have soon an European-wide target of 90% separate collection of PET bottles, which means going back to DRS, deposit return schemes, which will enable in turn closed loop high quality recycling of PET. So it doesn't make any sense to switch to compostables. So I don't consider compostable plastics to be a solution to the plastic issues, but it is a great tool in order to maximize captures during separate collection of the organics. And so you made the good examples, tea bags, coffee capsules. It was asked from the Zero Waste Networks to promote the compostable coffee capsules because 90% of the weight is coffee grounds, so it's fully compostable. Once we make the capsule itself compostable as well. So those are the good examples for compostable plastics.
Thank you, Enzo. I'm going to wrap up there, Tony, unless there was any quick comment you wanted to make. No? Good. Thank you very much. And Enzo, you have the floor now, and your long experience in creating high quality performing schemes for biowaste will be a valuable lesson, I think, for us all. Thank you.
So thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm enjoying the discussion very much indeed, and I'm very much looking forward also to the final debate. Yeah, my presentation is titled The Untapped Potential, and I will refer in particular not to biowaste as a whole, but what is the proper focus of today's meeting, which is food scraps. Food scraps is the organics which we historically had in our municipal solid waste. We can sure maximize collection of organics through garden waste, park waste, but that would increase municipal solid waste as a whole as well, which would not be so sensible. Whenever we have got garden waste, we have got gardens, backyards in which we can promote home composting, whereas we have to try and capture as much as food waste as possible. Food waste has been at the core of my interest, both as an agronomist, because I'm an agronomist by education. So I started with composting some 30 years ago. And now as a zero waster, also it is at the core of our zero waste vision, strategies and practices. All the best performing zero waste schemes we have implemented locally across Europe in many countries with very highly performing schemes, some of them even meeting 90% separate collection and more. They have got good management of biowaste, organics, and food waste at their core. It is fundamental to meet the European material recovery targets. You want to keep aligned with the European circular economy package. So let me mention that 65% preparation for recycling and reuse. You know, this is net recycling, net of the process rejects. And so purity of the materials will matter in the future. It will matter much more than in the past, because we used to stick to separate collection targets, but now we will have real recycling targets. It is also at the crossroads of various environmental policies, not only waste policy, but also common agricultural policy, the recently announced farm to fork strategy, carbon farming, tackling climate change, and so considering soils as a way to sequester carbon. And then you already mentioned obligation for separate collection, Article 22 of the Waste Framework Directive as of January the 1st of 2024. So there will be a widespread obligation. We did lately, we as Zero Waste Europe, we did upon cooperation with BIC, Bio-Based Industries Consortium, we did a EU-wide survey about the captures, the theoretical potential, the operational potential for collecting organics with a specific focus on food scraps and the current captures in order to assess the distance to targets. It includes an overview of the European policy drivers. Then we give the results, of course. Then we overview the few best practices across Europe. And there is also annexes with country-specific fact sheets with a few intriguing numbers, the key numbers, the total captures, and so on and so forth. You may download it free of charge from the website of BIC or Zero Waste Europe itself. Anyway, to start with, biowaste strategies are nothing brand new, actually. Well, of course, the new obligation for separate collection of the organics as of January the 1st of 2024 is a great achievement for Europe. Once again, Europe is exerting leadership at the global level in this respect. But actually, there are already long-running strategies and regulatory frameworks targeting food scraps, biowaste in different European countries. For instance, there are mandates, obligations for separate collection of biowaste in Germany. Actually, they started in 1985 to say composting should be the natural destination for biowaste. So they said, instead of sending it to landfilling or incineration, we have to implement a composting strategy. Then in 2015, they made it into an obligation everywhere, still not complied with in many parts of Germany let alone the large cities, but we will discuss implementation in large cities and densely populated areas in a while. In the Netherlands since 1995. In Italy, it has been made into an obligation starting with December the 31st, 2021, in Catalonia since 1995. Lately, Romania as well. They adopted an obligation bringing forward the deadlines of the European Circular Economy Package. In other countries, there were targets. For instance, both in UK and Italy, the general separate collection targets have acted as drivers for separate collection of the organics because there was no way to achieve highest recycling targets without separate collection of the organics. Anyway, despite a long story running across Europe about separate collection of the organics, still in most parts of Europe, most of biowaste is found in residual waste. This is Germany. Germany has been the leader in separate collection of the organics together with Austria as well. But the vast majority of food scraps may still be found in residual waste. Actually, so long story short, what did we find with our survey? We found that currently in Europe, 32% of biowaste and only 16% of food scraps are being separately collected. The percentage is higher for biowaste because there is the much easier separate collection of garden waste, which is driving higher percentages for biowaste as a whole than food scraps only, of course. But much as this is a similar situation in most European countries, so a higher percentage of captures for biowaste than for food scraps, there are a couple of countries with a similar or even higher percentage of capture for food scraps, namely Norway and Italy. So it's worth focusing on those countries to understand why, what is driving a higher capture of food scraps. It basically relates, first of all, to the collection models. Because typically, historically, in Central Europe, and also a long operational tradition in the United Kingdom, there, well, garden waste, collection only of garden waste, the easiest to be done, also with simplest systems, such as civic amenity sites. Then in Central Europe and in many parts of England, in the past also in Italy, there was commingled collection, garden and food waste. This is still going on, for instance, in the Netherlands, in Flanders, or in Germany, they call it Bioabfall, which means bio-waste. Of course, since this makes the material bulky, we need more capable containers, which in turn increase the cost of collection. So the only way to save on the cost of collection is to delay the collection frequency for organics, which may be good for garden waste, but makes it tough for food waste because people don't find it very much comfortable to retain food scraps for a longer time. Then there are countries where there is a dedicated collection for bespoke food waste. This is also gaining momentum in the United Kingdom. As you know, it is basically the mainstream option in Wales. In Italy, it is the widespread option. The leading parts of Spain, Norway, they have adopted such a scheme. And so with a dedicated system, we may target food scraps, which are much less bulky. We may use much cheaper small and open lorries. So the single collection round, it is way cheaper. And we can keep a comparatively high collection frequency for food scraps. So we increase the captures. Also, yeah, this has already been mentioned, Italy being the largest contributor to the current general captures of food scraps across Europe. However, focusing in specific on Italy, well, Italy has got a comparatively long story in separate collection of food scraps. It started as early as 1993. It started near Milan, in northeastern part of Milan, small villages to start with, but then it moved progressively towards southern Italy. It's not anymore, I would say, a matter of northern and southern Italy. We have got best performing schemes also in southern Italy, and I will mention a few in a while. It is spearheading the increase in recycling levels. Italy in 2019, we do not have the national statistics for 2020, but in 2019, it was already at 61.3%. We should be ranking third after Slovenia and Germany when it comes to national average for separate collection. It is fairly widespread. 70% of the population is already connected. And this is why it was comparatively easy to make it mandatory by 2021. The capture rates are comparatively high. This is only for food scraps, not bio-waste as a whole. And so you can see they are ranging from 40 to more than 100 kilograms. And you can see that there are highly performing schemes, both in northern Italy, but also in southern Italy. But mind Sardinia. Sardinia is a tourist island with a population of 1.5 million people and 20 million visitors every year. So a very complicated situation to deal with. They started from being the least performing region in Italy up to 10 years ago. They had as little as 3% separate collection. And then they started working consistently with a committed strategy, a visionary strategy on organics. And now they are ranking second in Italy. They are the runner-ups right after Veneto. Veneto is already at 75% regional average, and Sardinia is at 74.3%, and they are targeting 82% by 2023. And they will get there with separate collection, definitely. Now, the final part of my presentation will be more focused on the specific subject of today's discussion. We always say waste, and particularly bio-waste, is like water. It always flows the easiest way. So we have to create the conditions to make it flow easily, smoothly towards where it has to go. So the only way in order to maximize participation and capture is to use the proper tools to make the system user-friendly and to work on the collection frequency, as I was discussing a while ago. When it comes to the proper tools, it would not have been possible in Italy to make such achievements without considering the compostable bags. As I already told you, we do not consider them to be the solution to plastics. When we started in 1993, there was no big debate on the plastic tides, but we consider them right away as the proper tool in order to increase user-friendliness of the system so as to maximize participation and captures. So you maximize captures, you minimize percentages of organics and residual waste. You can reduce sharply the collection frequency for residual waste. And this in turn will exert also a further driving effect also for better separation of the dry recyclables, because people will find it more convenient to separate and set out separately collected plastics, separately collected glass, metals, and so on and so forth, rather than put them commingled in mixed garbage, because the collection for residual waste has been cut sharply. Yeah, this is from my own municipality. You can see the bucket, the kitchen caddy, and then it may go directly outside, or when we have got the high-rise buildings or apartment blocks, we use the wheelie bins in order to serve with one single peak more families and to save on time and to save on money. Now, is it possible also in the densely populated areas, in large cities? Yes, it is. This is the city of Milan, totaling 1.4 million people. But I would say Greater Milan totals 8 million people. And 100% of the population in Greater Milan is already connected with separate collection of the organics. But let's consider narrowly Milan City, 1.4 million people, 800,000 daily commuters producing food scraps in the city at least once a day for lunch, whereas for dinner they go back home and they have dinner at home. But restaurants, canteens are serving them during the day. Then 11 million visitors, including all those that come to Milan to visit separate collection, which is an increasing number. Anyway, after rolling out curbside scheme, including separate collection of the food scraps, we went up to 65% separate collection. This is the current level. Next step will be implementation of pay as you throw. And quite probably, we think it will go around 75 or 80% separate collection. And you can see that unit capture of food scraps is 100 and more kilograms food scraps per inhabitant and day. If we zoom in the details, actually part of it is made of commercial food waste, so it is produced by the commuters. But the most intriguing achievement is that if you add food scraps from households, so inhabitants, residents in Milan, plus commercial food waste from the large producers, and we compare it with food waste, which may still be found in residual waste, 87.3% is already collected separately, which is a terrific achievement in a city this size. Okay, now this is driving evolution of separate collection everywhere in Italy. I already discussed the national average is 61.3%, but we have to consider the best performing situation where the system has already been fully implemented and rolled out. For instance, we have got already 6 regions out of a total of 20, above 70%. Veneto, with a population of 5 million, is at 75. I already mentioned Sardinia. Lombardy, where I'm based, with a population of more than 10 million inhabitants, is at 72%. We even have more than 100 municipalities above 90%. Of course, those are smaller municipalities with less critical issues, less critical operational implementation, no commuters, easy communication to be shared amongst the population. But anyway, you can achieve also 90% in some situations. Now, last but not least, let me put the icing on the cake. We're not only discussing environmental sustainability and operational viability, but also economic optimization of the system. And some of you have already mentioned it. This is a fundamental chart, in the language of the future, apologies, from a joint survey, which has already been running for quite a few years between CIC, which is the Italian Composting Association, and Corepla, which is the product responsibility organization in the sector of plastics. And they're monitoring the fate of plastics and compostable plastics vis-a-vis composting and mechanical recycling. Now, you can see that total non-compostable materials, we are already happy, but it's still 240,000 tons a year. Thereof, plastics are the largest share, 145,000 tons per year. But you have to consider also a dragging factor. The dragging factor is the fact that each and every kilogram of rejects will take away also part of the products, organics or final composted products. So this decreases the revenues from selling compost and increases the costs of the disposing of the rejects. So the total cost of disposal for such materials is 90 to 120 million euros. Compostable plastics have been a fundamental tool in order to keep it as low as possible, but we wanted to keep improving in time and time, so to detect what are the materials that most frequently are non-compostable but end up in the compostable stream, and so we may consider replacing them with compostable stuff. I think I'm done. Yes, I am. Thank you very much for your attention.
Enzo, thank you. There's one quick question from me. Turn your slides off, please, and I invite the panel up to the screen. One quick question from me. Teresa Coffey, who was our former Environment Minister, wrote to me to say, well, food waste collections are not so important. They only contribute about 5% to overall recycling levels. What are your statistics?
No, actually, I think organics over cane paper is the largest contributor to total recycling rates back around in the early 2000s. By now, anyway, if you consider a city like Milan, you have seen it's 100 kilograms, which is 20% of municipal solid waste in Milan. 100 kilograms. Whereas paper is around 70 to 80 kilograms, glass is 30, 35 kilograms, plastics 25 kilograms or something like that, plastics and metals, because we have got commingled collection of the lightweight packaging. They are compactable and easy to separate with magnetic separation. So without organics, it will not be possible to get anywhere near the European long-term target of 65% net recycling. Definitely no way to get there. But I would say no way to get above 50% without the organics.
Thank you. Questions for Enzo from the panelists, please. Sean.
Great. Thank you, Enzo. That was really great. Really enjoyed your presentation and the way that you deliver it. I wanted to find out a little bit more about how it all worked in Italy. So was there, I mean, obviously you have a substantial infrastructure that we do not have in the UK. And was that push or pull? Were there great tax incentives? Was there government investment? How did you get that infrastructure so that you could handle it?
I think the question refers to composting as a whole and not to compostable plastics, right?
Yes.
Yeah. No, basically, yeah, there were the recycling targets acting as drivers. Of course, well, there was a consistent regulatory framework which was established by the national government. The cost of disposal in Italy is between 100 and 150 euros per ton, depending on whether it is landfilling, including the obligation on pretreatment before landfilling, because we have to align with the obligation stipulated by the landfill directive, or incineration. Composting and anaerobic digestion are remarkably cheaper because typically the cost for composting and anaerobic digestion, let me make a slight rearrangement in what Tony shared during his presentation. Typically, we are between 70 and 80 euros per ton for food scraps, and we have a dedicated gate fee for garden waste, which is collected separately from food scraps, which is another of the benefits to have a dedicated collection scheme for bespoke food waste, because you can have differentiated gate fees. So for garden waste, we pay 30 to 40 euros per ton. So actually, you save money. So that was the main driver. And we have got consistent evidence. You know, we have got a national report on waste management, which is compiled beautifully every year by our environment agency, ISPRA. And they have got a dedicated section on economic assessments. And it is showing consistent evidence that those areas with the highest recycling rates, so those that are separating organics, are those which are transferring the least cost to the taxpayer. So basically that was it. By now we have got an obligation anyway to be complied with by this year, by 2021.
Could you just give me an indication of the difference in scale of the composting industry in Italy to what we have in the UK?
Yeah, there was a very good remark done by Tony Breton before. We sometimes tend to have very large infrastructure. I think we have got the largest biowaste management site in Europe and the world, maybe, and also the second one, the runner-up, because it's Montello, totaling roughly 700,000 tons a year. It is also servicing the city of Milan, and Sesa in the southern part of Veneto, totaling some 500,000 tons. But then the others, well, the average site is actually across Italy, 20,000 to 30,000 tons a year. So I don't think it's much different from what we know about the United Kingdom. If you ask me about the type of technology, traditionally it has been composting, but now anaerobic digestion is catching up because also we do have a consistent scheme of incentives. It was for renewable energy before, now it's for delivering biomethane into the grid. And so this is driving the growth of anaerobic digestion. So at the moment, we have got pretty much the same capacity for composting and anaerobic digestion. Anyway, anaerobic digesters are totally suitable to deal with the compostable plastics because first of all, there is a requirement, and as an agronomist, I'm very much supportive to it, to have digestate post-composted in order to maximize the agro-environmental benefits of recovering organics. But even without that, if I may recommend you something, well, if you can go directly with digestates for land spreading, something to which, as I already said, as an agronomist, I'm not much supportive, but you can still get the compostable rejects for instance, from hydropulpers, from wet anaerobic digestion systems, and have a dedicated composting section for them only. But with dry batch systems, there is no problem for that because you don't have hydropulpers. You go directly with biowaste into the biocontainers and you have them digested.
I'm aware we're running over time, so I'm going to stop the questions unless there was a Jenny or Adam or Sam, you had a specific question for Enzo.
Hi, David. Yeah, just if I may, briefly. Thanks, Enzo. I had the pleasure to visit Italy a couple of years ago on one of the study tours and saw around a few of the sites, and it was really great. And one of the things that struck me was the level of education and communications that you deliver to the householders at a few of the different sites, and I just wondered, what we can learn from the sites in Italy in terms of, is it all about having a consistent message, across the country to enable those education and communications to really have effect, and for householders to easily understand what's expected of them?
Yeah, I will cut a very long story very, very short. Anyway, no, communication is important. It's of outstanding importance. For instance, in Milan, we had to translate the booklets for separate collection into 10 different languages because we have got 48,000 Filipinos, 25,000 Chinese, Egyptians, Peruvians, and they all do separate collection, which means you can do it everywhere, provided you have got the proper organizational framework, of course, because the organizational framework triggers the good behavior. However, I would say that first and foremost, the most important is to design the system properly. So communication is the gasoline, but it has to fill into the proper engine. Basically, consider in Italy, in Northern Italy, we collect organics twice a week and residual waste only once a week. So in your shoes, no, you in my shoes as an Italian, would you separate your organics to have them picked more frequently, or would you keep them into residual waste and retain them for 1 week? You understand the answer.
Yeah,
so
sure.
It is the type of the system that triggers the proper behavior. Thanks for your question.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, now I'm going to have to cut the conversation short because Chris Preston has to leave us at 3:30 and we're running a bit over time. How are we doing? Judy, Kathy and Richard, would you be terribly upset if we asked Chris to intervene now, because we've got 10 minutes before he has to leave? Would you mind if we change the order around?
No, I think that's fine.
Thank you very much indeed. Chris, have you heard enough to be able to enlighten us as to your thinking in DEFRA on these issues?
I have, and you'll be pleased to hear that. I think it accords very much with where we want to move, certainly in England. So for those who aren't familiar, I think most people are probably familiar. Waste policy is a devolved matter in the United Kingdom. So different parts of the UK can have, or within the framework of what was European law, adopt their own kind of approaches to waste management. But for those of you who are familiar, we are planning to legislate through the Environment Bill to make separate food waste collection mandatory in England, weekly separate food waste collection mandatory in England. And for me, there are a few interesting, we're planning to consult on our next steps for that relatively soon in true civil service style. I'll say in due course, in the fullness of time. Adam knows that's one of my favourite mantras. So I'm just trying to think of some of the key things I've taken from this. I think from Pen's presentation, I think cost is obviously very important, and we will have to do an impact assessment to help us decide what's the most cost-effective and efficient way to instigate separate food waste collection. So the cost data in the report is really, really interesting. The issues around actual participation, because it is that classic thing, you can lead a horse to water, but a pencil must be graphite. And if you can't persuade people to actually separately collect put out their food for separate collection, then you can put the mechanisms in place, but actually you don't achieve the outcomes you want, which is to divert things away from landfill and energy from waste as well. Also, the issues around microplastic. I think it's starting to get an increasing body of evidence that shows the kind of impacts on the environment of microplastics as our understanding increases. So that was really helpful. And obviously, just to kind of reflect slightly on a comment David made from a letter from Minister Coffey. Yes, there is the issue around separate food waste increases food waste collection by about 5 or 6%, but there's also the government's really, really strong commitment to achieve net zero. So that was also good to hear. I think there were a few things picking up on both Tony's and Enzo's presentations around, again, those themes around, it is possible to get people to participate. So I think there has been some kind of pushback in the past around saying, well, you know, people don't want to get involved, don't want to do separate food waste collection. But actually, if you make it easy for people, if you communicate to communities, even in densely populated areas like Milan, again, I always use Milan as an example, actually, whenever I'm talking about recycling rates and how they as a city have encouraged recycling. That's one of the topics I always used to use with ministers. If you can provide the right kind of infrastructure and encouragement for citizens, and also information as well, they will be more likely to participate. It was also interesting around mixed garden waste and food waste collections. That was another theme that I thought was quite an interesting one, particularly around the idea that will it encourage people to participate if you mix food waste and you mix garden waste, but it's not being collected for a couple of weeks. Will that put people off? So that's something really interesting for us to think about, because people don't want to have food waste hanging around for 2 weeks at a time. There's kind of that smelly waste. Interesting conversations, and certainly something for us to think about around the kind of infrastructure that we've got available in the UK. And obviously, it's quite a bit of in-vessel composting, but also we've had a big push on anaerobic digestion and looking at how we might be able to limit some of the impacts which people have raised with us, particularly around ammonia and spreading to land from digestate, and how can we mitigate those issues? Because obviously there are advantages about putting biomethane into the grid. Crikey, there was so much in there. It's like really difficult. It's almost like trying to do a rerun. My head's kind of whirling with lots of stuff. And I was quite interested in, it might be something to pick up. EPR for compostables was something that I thought was quite an interesting point that Tony made. And I think overall, really, we're all kind of pushing the same direction, I think, is the bottom line. You know, UK government is very, very committed to introducing separate food waste collection in England, and of course increasing our overall recycling rate and reducing our impact on the environment. So that's pretty much what I'd say there. I'm happy to take any questions on my thoughts, on your thoughts as well.
Thanks, Chris. Well, that's actually encouraging to hear that we seem to all be going in the same direction. Of course, you know, there's lots of forks in the road before we get to the final destination. Now, are there questions for Chris Preston from the panel? Please, Sean.
Thank you, Chris, for that great sum up. And I know you haven't got much time, so I'll cut straight to it. Obviously, at A Plastic Planet, we focus on the vast quantities of plastic pollution that smother our earth. We always talk about oceans. I'm so thrilled today that we're focusing on the amount of plastic within soil. But one thing that we absolutely know, look at the new Greenpeace report that's coming out tomorrow morning on supermarket reduction of plastic and how poor it is, because it's a voluntary commitment. And what I'd love to know is, why are we not using the law here? Why are we still looking at voluntary collaborations, commitments, when we know the problem and we know the solutions? Italy has proven the way forward. So why are we not actually using the power of the law here? And if you are considering it, can I ask you when?
Well, power of the law in terms of what, though?
To rather than expect people to not, if you look at the amount of plastic that we can legally put into our soil, I think it's 100,000 tonnes in the UK. We can plough into our soil. We know that it's 5%, sometimes 10%, sometimes up to 20% of the content of our compost can be contaminated with plastic. Why are we not legislating against this?
That's a good question. And I think, Judy, I think I'm kind of preempting Judy and Kathy's talk when they come on in a moment, because for the PAS standard, I think one of the things we're going to look at is looking at how we review that. And that's one of the commitments we made in our resource and waste strategy for composting. But more broadly, in terms of getting plastic packaging out of the system, you know that one of the other measures that we've got in the Environment Bill is to introduce producer responsibility. And the government's priority is to introduce producer responsibility for packaging. And obviously a subset of introducing producer responsibility for packaging will include, of course, plastics. And of course, the government has taken steps to reduce some single-use plastics, but we also want to move more down the road of how do you reduce, reuse, recycle as part of the overall system. So yes, we will be using the law in one way, shape or form or another to tackle the packaging and to move us towards a more resource efficient economy is where we want to be in that.
Thank you.
Another question for Chris before he leaves. Philippa from NFU, did you want to say anything? Jenny? Jenny, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, I think, you know, obviously on behalf of organics recycling facilities, they absolutely support anything, you know, to increase recycling rates and anything that, you know, to ultimately result in better environmental protection in terms of, you know, materials that go to soils. And obviously they want to be able to be in a position to take all this extra food waste that's going to come about as a result of the mandatory collections. But something that's been flagged with me repeatedly is, you know, all these increasing standards, and I know that Kathy and Judy and Rich are going to come on to talk about the, you know, the changes to the regulations around operations. You know, I think all the industry is behind these, but they also they're businesses and they have to make money. So I think, you know, there needs to be some acknowledgement that, you know, we'd love to be in a position where we had gate fees like there is in Italy of, you know, 80 euros a tonne or whatever it is, and you know, I think that's sort of the level we need to get to enable the organics industry to operate properly and meet all these ambitions. And obviously ultimately that's got to come from somewhere, and it's, you know, it's probably going to be the waste producers that ultimately have to bear that cost.
I'm not sure, was there a question you wanted for me to answer?
Well, I guess it was just, you know, is that something that's built into all the modelling that DEFRA are looking at, you know, in terms of the increased operational costs in order to achieve all the right economic, right environmental outcomes?
Sure. So, I mean, every government policy that has an impact on business and local authorities as well has to go through an economic assessment. So that'll be part of that. We'll publish that, and people have an opportunity to comment. I mean, the one thing I should have said, not just in relation to yours, Jenny, is actually government policy is to try and reduce the amount of food that's wasted in the first place. I mean, that's what that, you know, we still waste, particularly as householders, we still waste far too much food. So we've been quite successful with our Courtauld agreement. If you're not already a signatory, please sign up. If you're a food waste business, if you're a food waste manufacturer or producer, you know, in order to reduce the amount of food waste that actually comes out of homes, comes out of businesses, because that, you know, it almost seems counterintuitive to me to grow food and then throw away good food.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think the organics industry very much are on board with the waste hierarchy and would love to see as much reduction and reuse where possible.
Yeah, so that's my nirvana, to reduce food waste as far as possible.
Philippa.
Thanks, David. Yeah, just to reflect a bit on Tony's presentation about the importance of soil, and quite frankly for our members, the soil is their greatest asset. So my question to you, Chris, is really in terms of microplastics. Well, farmers understand the benefits of recycling organics back to land, as Jenny said. We don't want to hinder any recycling objectives. But do you think we're acting too slowly? Do you think we are doing enough? Because in my view, some of our end markets are land bank for these materials. The farmers are getting a little bit unsure and unsteady, and we don't want to lose market confidence in that. So do you think we're heading in the right direction quick enough?
Well, in terms of introducing separate food waste collection, or in terms of composting, well, for me, you know,
I think in terms of the quality of materials going to soil, I think is what Philippa meant.
Yeah, right. Sorry. Microplastics being the key issue within that comment. Yeah.
So it's, well, from my perspective, I would like everything to happen tomorrow. So, you know, and I'd like everything to happen tomorrow. So, you know, no, nothing is. I think nothing is ever moving quick enough. But actually, you have to move within the process and the time, and changing the law and working with stakeholders. You know, everything has a process to go through. You know, if you look at the reforms we want to introduce through the resource and waste strategy, that's been a long, what would seem to people looking from the outside, a long process to get us to this next set of consultations that we're about to launch. But actually, you know, even in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, not a second has been wasted to get us to the point where, particularly if you're going to change the law, you need to change the law and you need to get it right. So proper consultation, proper scientific evidence, proper research, proper understanding, proper analysis is absolutely crucial. So I know I made a glib comment, yes, I would like to change it tomorrow, but actually we need to have things underpinned by all those precursor things that I've just talked about to make sure that if you are going to make changes, you're not going to stock up one problem in favour of another. So that's my kind of answer to that.
Okay, thank you. Chris, I'm aware you have to leave. Sandy, for Chris before he does? Oh, no, okay. Tony, did you have a question?
Yes, it's just a quick one. Thanks, Dave. Thanks for the summary, Chris. Just say, if you're looking at the cost of bio-waste bags, there's fruit and vegetable bags and carrier bags, which you could easily mandate to be compostable, and those bags are there. But just following on from Sian's point, one of the discussions that was on the radio yesterday was about the role government is playing in COVID. And it's not telling people what to do, it's asking them what to do. Does government not have a role to tell people about how to recycle properly rather than asking them to recycle properly?
Well, I think part of it is to make sure that information is available to the public and to make it easier for them to recycle. So again, one of the measures we want to introduce as part of the reforms that we're introducing through packaging is to give clear indications on packaging, to say things that are recyclable and not recyclable, and to introduce modulated fees. So for those types of packaging that can't be recycled, it'll be more costly for producers. So there's a direct financial incentive. But at the same time, you're also giving people really clear signals to say, before you might have been confused, but actually now it's easier because we've made clear distinctions on whether this thing is recyclable or not recyclable. But yeah, I'm not quite sure what kind of compulsion you would use on householders, unless you have like people coming around to say, oh, you're putting that in the wrong place. And the government's been really, really clear about removing those kind of penalties on householders. About when things are complicated for householders, that's where people make mistakes. If you make it easy for people, they'll be able to comply much more easily, and I think that's where we need to be.
Okay, well,
yeah. I think Tony would like to say to you, well, in Wales they do penalties for non-compliance, so it is possible.
In China they have people inspecting you as you to put your waste in your bin, but I'm not suggesting to go that far.
In China.
Yeah, there is I think there is an opportunity for more encouragement, shall we call it?
Or can I suggest, Tony, the other way as well is don't expect it to be about the householder. Make it easier for her. Take the confusion out of it. Make industry change. Yeah. That's where we need to put the pressure because they're the ones creating the confusion.
Yeah, I think that is very much where we're trying to head, to make it as easy as possible for people. My experience is people want to do the right thing. Research by RAP shows people want to do the right thing. They just sometimes don't know what the right thing is because it's too confusing. So we can make it easier for them. You don't have to compel. You can just make it easy because people want to do the right thing by and large. Would be, I think, my approach. I think very much government's approach to this.
Or a halfway house is pay as you throw, but that's another discussion.
Yes, long live optimism, Chris. Thank you for joining us. I know you're going to leave us. Thanks for sharing that, and I'll see you soon on one of the next meetings.
Great, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you indeed. Now, I'm sorry, I apologise to the audience, but I apologise above all to Judith, to Catherine, and to Richard, who have been patient with us for delaying their presentation. I believe, Judy, that you're going to go first. Am I correct?
That's right. I'm just introducing, really.
Okay, and Charles is sharing your slides now, and we can all see them. So please go ahead.
Thank you. So my name's Judy Proctor, and I work for Environment Agency that covers England, as Chris explained. And really what I wanted to do was to give you a quick overview and then hand over to Kathy and Richard, who I work with, to really explain the sort of regulatory perspective for around biowaste. So if we could go to the next slide, please. And in this, I just wanted to explain as Environment Agency, as I say, we cover England and we're an operator, particularly in flood defence. We're an advisor and produce state of the environment reports, and we're also the environmental regulator around biowaste. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So in this, I've tried to set out an overview of where we're interested in, and really the speakers before me have really explained the overall picture. So what we're interested in is ensuring that our regulatory framework, whether we're looking at the sources, the processing or disposal and recovery, is coherent and it makes sense. And for that, we do need to understand the sources, and there's been a lot of discussion around the sort of mandatory food waste collection, but green waste and sewage sludge, so thinking of all of those biowaste. Then very much thinking about the kind of regulation we use to govern its processing, and then looking at the standards when those biowastes are then returned to agricultural soil. And we have really looked at where we need to tighten up within that system, and increasingly looking at upstream preventative actions. And the other speakers have really covered why that is important to us. So we've talked about needing to prevent waste in the first place. We've also talked about how organic recovery is really important for us, whether that be against recycling targets, whether that's around, as a useful addition to soil and soil nutrients, and also around net zero. We're also concerned around protecting soil health and making sure that we don't have those risks around what we're doing to the environment, around microplastics and other chemicals. And importantly, and it's one of the things that Philippa touched on, is that we need to make sure our regulatory changes protect the market, so that there is a market value and there is market confidence in the end product. And we have increasingly heard from some farmers, but also some trade associations, concern around that microplastic risk, not understanding the long-term position. So we've been very happy to work with others, work in partnerships, so that whenever we make a regulatory change, it is within the whole context of that system. And so now if you could move on to the next slide, and I'll hand over to Kathy, who will take us through the processing.
Hi everybody, and thanks Judy. So we've been talking about contamination levels for some time, and herald Tony's approach, and there's various people on the call I think today that we've had long discussions around what action we should take to limit contamination. So after many years, I think what we've proposed through both our call for evidence, standard rules, consultation, and the biowaste appropriate measures documents is a 5-year roadmap. So we will be looking at improving the input, improving the pre-processing, improving the processing afterwards, and also through the quality protocol, actually over time tightening the plastic limits that go out in the PAS standard QP certified material. So we've suggested a 5-year roadmap in agreement with local authorities, the industry, and DEFRA, in that over the course of the next 5 years we'll look to reduce all of those limits, and that will get us into a place where we've got better reassurance, if you like, that the quality of the material is going to be what the end user expects. So how are we going to do that? Standard rules permits will have an acceptance limit for plastic contamination in the permit of 5% for food waste sites, and actually quite a tight, we've retained the tight limit for green waste and the on-farm slurry and manures, with the belief that really plastic shouldn't be in those waste streams. They shouldn't be in segregated garden waste streams, and they certainly shouldn't be in cattle slurry and manure. And then say use a 5% weight by weight contamination limit for the standard rules. But if you put that in perspective, we only have 7 AD waste or installation sites that take food nationally, and we only have 4 of those standard rules IVC permits. So those are the measures for the standard rules. We're also looking at the bespoke permits and bespoke permit review, and we'll be expecting those over time. We'll be expecting those operators to put in measures for pre-acceptance, acceptance, and cleaning up the material before it's processed. A lot of the problems we think arise from things like hammer mills putting lots of food waste through a plant and literally just smashing it up and putting it into the process. So we'll work with industry over the next, and the local authorities over the next few years, with Judy's work, working with supermarkets and the food waste, the bigger food waste producers. We're looking at packaging reduction and those sorts of initiatives. And I go back to some of the points that have been made. Most of our permits are recycling permits, and we need to demonstrate that there has been recycling taking place. And I think it's a big issue for the AD sector, especially taking the food waste, is that we get all of that material. It's high grade resource through the plant and recovered. It's not just about gas, it's about incentivizing and getting better market value for the digestate. So the other things that we've done through the standard rules is opened up the composting opportunities to the sector to compost separated fibre, and also for the AD operators that are operating on standard rules, that they would be able to compost their material on site without the need for a bespoke permit. There are certain control measures around that, but we would open up the sort of activities that people could do on site. So that, taking up Sam's point earlier on about moving material around, that opens up quite an opportunity, because where you've got pasteurised and ABPR compliant separated fibre, or ABPR separated fibre from farms, that can move to composting arrangements. So we should be able to see this bigger integration with the industry working together, I hope. When you look back on Tony's presentation, the amount of carrier bags in fully recycled material it frightens me, and it's not about just the microplastics. We see farmers losing contracts, tenancies, and I've said this repeatedly, I know, over the years, so I sound like a worn-out record. But we see incidents, and certainly through the standard rules consultation, we had a lot of feedback that plastics don't cause incidents. That they do cause incidents at these plants, and they cause catastrophic failure. So there are other issues that we're concerned about. It's not just about the plastics, it's about the operational compliance of the site, and it's also about worker safety. So there are very far-reaching effects, I think, of putting plastic in the front end. So those are the measures that we're going to take over the processing and permitting side. And I work quite closely with Richard, so I'll introduce Richard and disappear.
Thanks, Kathy. If we move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so quality protocols. So we've started on a programme to review all 13 of the currently agreed quality protocols. So the QPs are frameworks which, if they're followed correctly, they confer end of waste status on the end product. So that means that that final material no longer needs to meet waste regulatory controls, doesn't need permits, that sort of thing. So we started off with a review of the AD and compost QPs in October 2019, with a call for evidence being issued in December 2019. So the call for evidence concluded at the end of January last year, and using the evidence that was provided by industry and our own internal evidence, we reviewed those QPs, the outcome being that both need to be revised before we then republish as rebranded resources frameworks. So the new resource frameworks will be England-only documents that will be hosted on gov.uk once they're published. So we made the outcome of the review known December last year and issued a position statement that's on gov.uk, and there's a link to it there at the bottom of the slide if you want to go and have a look. And that outlines the reasons for the revision, and asked industry to work with us to set up a task and finish group. And that task and finish group will steer the scope of the revision, but will also fund our technical specialist time in being able to do any technical work on that revision. So there are a number of issues with the QPs, including out-of-date risk assessments, issues with the fertiliser regs, but I'll focus on plastics today. So from that call for evidence, pretty much every respondent came back that plastics were an issue, and it was fairly obvious that that's affecting market confidence. Now, as Tony said in his presentation earlier, requirement of end of waste is that you have a standard and you have a market. So if the standard is affecting the market, then there's an issue with end of waste. So the plastics limits are currently set within the standards, PAS 100, PAS 110, and not actually in the QP. So there's a couple of ways of working this out in the task and finish groups that we set out. We could either update the PAS standard with our input, or you could create a brand new standard outside of PAS, outside of BSI, that would then be incorporated into or referenced by the new resources framework. Or finally, the resources framework could add conditions over the top of the current PAS standard. So we would reference it and then say, you know, something like the PAS says this, but to reach end of waste status, you need to meet a further limit. So the task and finish group will look at the question how to deal with plastics and come to a decision. And that same task and finish group will also be looking at the scope of the entire revision. So do they want to add in new waste types, or are there new end markets that look attractive for AD or compost? So that's essentially where we are with quality protocols. If Kathy or Judy want to add anything else?
Thank you, Richard, and Judy and Kathy. Can I ask you, Charles, please, to take down the slides and for the panelists to come back to the screen. Philippa, you've heard from the Environment Agency, the regulator. You've heard from Preston, the legislator. I mean, are you, as farmers, is this enough?
Thanks, David. You know, it's good to hear that we're moving in the right direction and there is ambition to get this limit reduced. But as you know, Kathy and Judy highlighted, it does take a lot of work to really pull this in. So we do appreciate that. You know, there is a lot of work. There is work to be done throughout the whole waste supply chain, and that requires a lot of collaboration. But I still do feel that we might not be setting targets that they could be too lenient. That's my only issue. I think as the science emerges, we might learn more about the plastic that may be in our soil. Is there any scope to review these limits going forward, or what are the timeframes for the roadmap, or is there any opportunities to review it as it goes?
I think, Philippa, our 5-year roadmap for the biowaste permits is only part of the bigger picture, I think. And this is literally just trying to tackle the contamination at the front end, essentially, and get that down. There are other streams of work that are ongoing. It doesn't stop there. And I've just said the very same to one of the members of ADEPT, is that, you know, this is part of the picture and that we'll keep moving. I think, we've been talking about contamination for so long, and I know I get very tired of talking about it. So I think this is just the first step, I hope, towards a better, you know, what we want is a process that delivers the reprocessing of a resource into something that's very valuable and very valuable for farmers, that farmers want. And that's what I would see as success, is that we get something that we are all happy with. Judy, I don't know if you want to comment on the.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks. But before Judy, can I ask Jim a question, and also Enzo a question? Jim, what can the plastics industry help on here on making sure that we're getting less and less plastics into food waste? We don't want contaminations of compostables into plastic recycling, and we don't want contamination of plastics into food waste recycling. What can you do as the plastics industry to help this?
Well, maybe I could just make a comment. I mean, and it may be not a very welcome comment, but there was a comment before that, you know, we shouldn't really have rules, and we should let people, how would I say that, be very flexible, etc., etc. And I would just like to make one comparison with the new back to plastics and the export of plastics from the UK, collected plastics, which we all know has been going on for 15, 20 years. And now from the 1st of January, we have the Basel Agreement on plastics, and there are very clear rules coming in that, you know, sorry guys, we cannot ship material with contamination that we have done for a long time. And what you suddenly see happening is that, you know, the exporters in the UK, they are rushing to do better sorting and whatever else. And you know, without just going on, I mean, it's a sort of a stick and a carrot approach. The question is, which one do you put in front of the other? And maybe we've come to a point where we've tried the carrot, it's not working that well, if I understand it correctly, and we have to get a little more hard, a little more serious about how we push this. And I just throw that question open as food for thought for there. Coming to your point, David, about how to get the plastics out, if you like, of the thing. It's of course about, education, which is kind of obvious. If you then say, well, that's not working, you know, and that's really plowing cost into it. It's a question of whether you're actually going to put the material through some sort of plastic removal, for want of a better word, as you go and process it, either on the input end, which is what we do in mechanical recycling, let's say, or indeed on the output end after its thing. And those are sort of for discussion, but you know, it becomes a physical operation. So I'll just leave the floor with those two comments per se.
And Enzo, the question of end of waste is interesting because, you know, I remember from my times in Italy that you could only go to soil with compost that met mandated end of waste criteria defined by law, and that if you had compost that was outside of that end of waste criteria, it was a waste. It had to go to landfill or to landfill cover. But also as an operator, you actually risked losing your authorization, because if you were producing waste, you were no longer a recovery operation, but a disposal operation. Now, is that common, the Italian situation around Europe, or is that just a specific Italian situation?
No, that's fairly widespread. For instance, they have got similar standards which are monitored by BBIA in Germany. They have got similar standards. They have got the Compostverordnung, the composting ordinance in Austria. So it's basically they tend to have end of waste standards all across Europe. This is now going to be unified at European level for the CE branded, the European branded fertilizers, because there's going to be this common standard from across Europe, but still there is the possibility for different member states to define their own standards. But if I may say, may I point you to, because we were discussing where compostable plastics make sense, where they do not. Well, actually, you have got a wonderful tool which was prepared by RAP, which is a decision-making tree. And it includes also different scenarios, whether you are a consumer, whether you are an NGO, whether you are a producer, whether you are a dealer, and something like that, in order to assess the situation and make the best decision, whether it should be made compostable or whether you should be heading towards reduction, reuse, durability, which is the main trend across Europe.
Yeah, I mean,
great tool.
Yeah, the problem with all this is, of course, the tools are great, but if it's cheaper to do something, as you say, you know, waste is like water; it always flows downhill to the lowest common denominator, and that's why you have laws. Are there any last questions, please, for our colleagues from the Environment Agency? Tony.
Hi, thanks. I know that a lot of the conversation here is about plastics, but my question is wider. How do we make sure that from a regulatory side, if it's possible, that what goes back to soil is actually what the soil needs? Enzo has said that he wouldn't be putting whole digestate back to soil. We know it causes compaction, it has impacts on the carbon efficiency of the soil, it has issues with biodiversity. I'm seeing quite a lot of stuff come through my desk at the moment on conductivity, which isn't even covered at any other passes, but is covered under waste deployments. So how do we make sure that the resource that we've got actually helps the soil, not just gives the targeted nutrients that Philippa's members need, but actually helps the soil as a whole?
Subject to another webinar, I think.
I think that's a farming water webinar. I think that's your answer. I think that all through farming rules for water, those rules.
And I was also going to make
Yeah, you're breaking up there, Judy. I don't know if anybody else is having problems hearing you, but farming rules, I think, were the message I got.
Farming rules, and the fact that what we're proposing is to change what the quality protocol. So when we look at the quality protocol, what comes next, we will look at things in the round, not just sort of the plastics aspect.
Gotcha. Sam, have you any last comments? And Jenny, you're the people who are going to be treating this stuff.
Yes, it'd be interesting to know where Philip has said that it may not be able to go to land. What do the regulators see as the other options? We obviously need to treat biowaste so they don't go to landfill. They can't be applied to land. What is the next best option from a regulator's opinion?
I think that's a subject for another conversation as well. I mean, I'm aware of all the work that's going on around digestates and composting and looking at other applications. And yourself, you've got the digestate working group. I think there are some interesting developments that may not be just about land bank. I think we've got which we'll have to consider all of those applications. I'm quite excited, and I hope that the industry is that we may get more join up between the composters and the AD, to be honest, Sam. I think they've been very disjointed. And certainly, I've kept repeating myself, the composters have got a real role in this sector. We talk about AD a lot, but I think the guys that are doing the composting know what they're doing, and maybe, they can have a bigger role, I hope, over the next few years. Things will change. I think it will become a bit of a moving beast, but I think that's, you know, where we've got good, well, I think we've got good trade body relationships and we work well together between us. We don't always agree, but I think we will find other markets and other uses. That's my belief.
Thank you. It's just of interest because obviously if the QPs for compost open up more markets and not in AD, I think it will force some AD fibre into that market. I'm just interested to see which way you think it'll go. Thank you.
Are there any last minute comments? Jenny, please.
Thanks, David. Yeah, Kathy, I just wondered if you could say anything further on the work that you're doing with the local authorities in terms of the, you know, quality material coming into site. Obviously, our members would very much welcome, you know, improved quality of materials into site, and, you know, obviously the work you're doing to change the permits in terms of what they're allowed to take, you know, hopefully will drive that improvement. But, you know, that's something they often raise with me as well, you know. If it didn't arrive at our site in the first place, then, you know, it wouldn't be a problem. And just conscious that local authorities, you know, when you talk to them and their, you know, representative bodies, you know, they're very much struggling in terms of resources to make improvements.
And we are aware of that. That's why we've not shut the gate completely on contaminated feedstocks, because we know they are under pressure. So go back to standard rules and the limits that have been imposed there. Standard rules are available for an operator that accepts that the rules, that the risks have been managed through those rule sets. And if you can't comply, then you go on to the bespoke rule set. We have more bespoke sites than we have standard rules because people want to do things slightly differently. Or they want to locate their sites in different locations. So that's one of the biggest pushbacks that we had from the local authorities was this will completely tear the bottom out of the recycling infrastructure, which it won't, because we've got a really small group of people that use those standard rule sets. So when you look at that on its own, it's not going to affect a huge amount of people. But going forward, this is where I look to Judy quite a lot too, and in the whole plastic strategy on Nina Sweet's work that she's doing on the organics roadmap, is that those links will get better. I think we will work quite a lot more closely than with local authorities on this issue. And I think Judy and I presented to ADEPT, which is the Association for the Directors of Environmental Services or something like that. Sorry, I can't remember them all. They were very shocked about the amount of plastic that gets through the system from green and food waste. They really were quite taken aback. And so I think it's the first step is dealing with some of those misconceptions and the feedback we've had from the standard rules that it doesn't cause incidents. It gets taken out of all the sites through the process. The sites can cope with it. They've all got the infrastructure on site, which we know isn't true. So if we can, it is carrot and stick, Jim. It's and I've said that a couple of years ago. We've had enough carrot, and this is time for a little bit of a sharp stick. Is we try and squeeze both ends of the picture. We try and squeeze the front and the back end, but we are speaking, and we will speak to the local authorities. It's only the start of a journey, Jenny, I think, and that's the way we're going.
Thank you.
Just to add in a quick bit, we've Kathy mentioned Nina Sweet's work with the organics roadmap, and there are local authorities that from both big trade organisations that we're working with on that. And the idea is that through the Recycle Now campaign, through Court Hold, through the organics recovery, we join up and make sure we've got strong messages about the need to reduce plastics contamination of food and garden waste. And that carries through with a consistent set of messages, engagement work, and real behaviour change around trying to reduce what gets put in the first place. So there's definitely more to come with those projects.
Thank you, Judy, for that. Enzo, a last comment from you. I mean, all this is great, with this voluntary work, the various commitments, etc. Is it enough? Because I remember when we did the law in 2010 that all food waste had to be collected with compostable bin liners. The law was done, and overnight it was implemented, and over the next year or 2 years, everyone got used to it. Will this sort of voluntary approach of the UK actually have, do you think, that sort of rapid improvement in quality that we got in Italy with that law in 2010? Are other countries doing similar?
Well, definitely voluntary agreements go the proper direction, but usually they're not sufficient. A consistent regulatory framework which establishes duties and roles is always more performing in its respect. Anyway, if I may remember, we did some work in the early 2000s for RAP in order to define a way to define the standards for composting, including impurities and something like that. And then you can make reference also to the fundamental study we did for the European Commission in 2004 on the different type of contaminants in compost. It can still be downloaded free of charge as the reference study in the European Union from the website of the European Commission. So there is no need to reinvent the wheel. Coming back to the national strategy, definitely a consistent regulatory framework which ensures cross-consistency amongst different operational areas, different roles, different duties, and so on and so forth, would be much better tailored in order to speed up the process. Much as I'm very much supportive to voluntary agreements as long as a regulatory framework is there.
Thank you. I'm aware we've gone 2 hours, so I'm also aware that there are a lot of questions that are unanswered in the question and answer box. So I apologize to you, Jane Gilbert. You've asked some intelligent questions, and others have too. I think that we have probably tired everybody out and tired out our speakers for sure with 2 hours with us. So may I thank you all, speakers and panelists, for having been with us, for having given us the benefit of your insights and experience. And I look forward to seeing you all at the next occasion that either you or we organise. Thanks very much, everybody.